Okay, so get this. Sony might be buying Kadokawa, the parent company of Elden Ring's developer, From Software. Didn't have that on my 2024 bingo card. Kadokawa is a huge Japanese multimedia company. They're into everything: manga, magazines, movies, and yes, video games. But they're not just the guys behind From Software. They've got their hands in so many pots, with thousands of employees and multiple business divisions. But before we get into that, here's the question of the day. Does anyone feel like the worship of Unreal Engine 5 by gamers is getting dumber? Just overnight, millions of YouTubers and Twitch streamers are all reacting to the UE 5.5.5 update and acting jaw-droppingly amazed at how incredible it is. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because I really want to know if I'm the only one, and we'll get back to this topic a bit later in the video. And I think more people should ask the question. So, yes or no, is Unreal Engine 5 ruining gaming? Now, some people confuse publishers like Bandai Namco with actual ownership of From Software. That's not the case here. Bandai Namco just helped publish their games in the past, but From Software has been moving towards self-publishing for bigger control. Sony already owns a tiny 2% slice of Kadokawa and a slightly bigger stake in From Software. But buying Kadokawa outright, that would mean Sony gets a controlling hand in From Software and all of Kadokawa's other business arms. Why does Sony want this? Well, duh. Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro. Imagine if future games like those were PlayStation exclusives. That's a massive win for Sony. But it's not just about games. Kadokawa's got tons of manga and other media properties that fit perfectly into Sony's broader entertainment goals. It's all about expanding their empire, not just boosting PlayStation. So, is this deal happening? Apparently, it's serious enough that Kadokawa and Sony are dodging direct answers, which usually means talks are real. Kadokawa's current market value is around $2.7 billion, and their stock just jumped 20% on this news. If Sony pulls this off, they'd be investing in way more than just From Software. They'd be getting a foothold in manga and Japanese media, which is still a huge market. That said, $3 billion-ish is a big chunk of change for a company like From Software that only releases a game every few years. As much as I love Elden Ring, one big release doesn't automatically mean huge profits. Still, the real strategy here is probably long-term. Think Bloodborne remasters, sequels, or even launching a PlayStation 6 with a killer From Software exclusive. Sony's definitely playing the long game. But hey, mergers like this? Not everyone's thrilled. Some think it's bad for the gaming industry because it kills competition. Remember the good old days when studios were all competing, taking risks, and delivering unique games? We're losing that to a world where giant companies own everything. It's not ideal, but hey, it's the corporate world. We're just along for the ride. If this deal goes through, though, it's going to be a massive power move for Sony. Regardless of what people think, and despite some claiming the console wars are over, I'd argue they're more intense than ever, just in a different way. The focus isn't on hardware specs anymore. It's all about content, exclusivity, and who can grab the biggest audience. From a business perspective, the exclusivity wars have never been stronger, and this move by Sony feels like their retaliation for Microsoft's $69 billion Activision Blizzard acquisition. Think about it. Microsoft grabbing Activision gave them Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, and more, bolstering their Game Pass library and pushing the boundaries of their ecosystem. That was a massive flex and shifted the narrative in their favor. Now, this potential Kadokawa buyout is Sony's way of firing back. It's their way of saying, you think Call of Duty is big? Fine, but imagine Elden Ring 2 or Bloodborne 2 as PlayStation exclusives. Both companies know exclusives drive console sales and ecosystem loyalty. And while Microsoft has been scooping up publishers like crazy, Sony's playing a more targeted game, doubling down on what they do best: quality single-player experiences and culturally impactful content. This is Sony's revenge. They're not trying to buy the biggest pie. They're going for the tastiest slices. But what about Nintendo? Here's where it gets spicy. If this deal goes through, studios like Spike Chunsoft and Acquire might not be working with Nintendo anymore. That could mean no more Pokemon Mystery Dungeon from Chunsoft or Mario and Luigi games from Acquire. Ouch. Take Mario and Luigi. Brothership. If Acquire gets pulled into the PlayStation Studios ecosystem, Nintendo might have to find a new developer for future titles. Same for Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Sure, Sony could let these collaborations continue, but let's be real. They'll probably want these studios focused on PlayStation exclusive projects. What's next? If this acquisition happens, we're talking about a seismic shift in the gaming landscape. I'm sure you didn't expect Nintendo to get dragged into this, right? So what are your thoughts on all this? Do you think Sony buying up this publisher is a good or bad thing for the gaming industry?
Just forget about it.
So, Star Wars Jedi Survivor has issues on the PS5 Pro, but I'm starting to wonder who's to blame here. The hardware, the devs, or is Unreal Engine 5 just too overhyped? Let's get into it, and of course credit goes to Digital Foundry for Jedi Survivor tech analysis. You've got two modes, performance mode and quality mode, but the performance mode is where things get complicated. They tried adding back some ray tracing effects, like reflections, which is cool in theory, but the results are hit or miss. For example, when you're outside and there's a lot of shiny stuff to reflect, it looks decent. But indoors or in more demanding areas, the reflections look way less detailed than what you'd expect. Like, sometimes it feels like the game just gives up halfway on how the lighting is supposed to work. Then there's the lighting system, which is supposed to switch between real-time and pre-baked lighting. The problem? It doesn't always nail the transition smoothly. You can literally see the lighting pop in when you move around, and it's especially noticeable in bigger levels. So yeah, it's kind of distracting. Now, about the resolution, oh man, they say the game is targeting 1800p in performance mode, but it's not even close most of the time. It drops below 720p in heavy scenes, which is like Xbox 360 levels of low. They're using this thing called PSSR to upscale it, but it's noisy and full of weird artifacts. Honestly, the old FSR solution they used before looked way better, even if it wasn't perfect. One good thing, the frame rate. It stays pretty solid at 60 FPS most of the time, even with all the extra effects. So that's nice. But I can't help feeling like they sacrificed a lot in the visuals department just to get there. And here's the kicker. Even on a beastly gaming PC with a top-tier GPU like the RTX 4090, the game struggles if you turn on ray tracing. It stutters like crazy, which makes you think, is this less about the hardware and more about how the game was designed? So yeah, it's better on the PS5 Pro compared to PC in some ways, but it's still not great. It's like they couldn't quite figure out how to balance everything properly. What do you think? Should developers focus more on better optimization at launch? Or is this just the reality of pushing tech boundaries? All right, so get this. There's a rumor floating around that Rocksteady might be working on a remake of Batman: Arkham Asylum. I mean, we're talking about the game that kicked off the entire Arkham series and redefined what superhero games could be. If this turns out to be true, it could be huge for fans. The rumors are a bit shaky though. A former Rocksteady developer tried to shut them down, but you know how leaks work. Until there's an official statement, it's all up in the air. Plus, people are speculating that if they remake Arkham Asylum, they might also update the rest of the trilogy. And honestly, that feels kind of overdue, doesn't it? Looking back, Arkham Asylum was groundbreaking when it first came out. But let's be real, it hasn't aged perfectly. One of the big things that stands out now is how clunky Batman's movement can feel. Later games like Arkham City and Arkham Knight made huge strides in gameplay. They gave us better controls, more fluid animations, and, of course, that sweet open-world design. By comparison, Asylum feels a bit boxed in and stiff. If Rocksteady does decide to tackle a remake, they've got a couple of ways to improve the game. They could tweak Batman's movement to make it smoother and more modern. Maybe even rework some of the level designs to feel a little less linear. They don't need to turn it into a full open-world game, but giving us a bit more freedom wouldn't hurt. But here's the thing, Arkham Asylum wasn't just about gameplay. It nailed the atmosphere of Batman's world, the eerie, gothic vibes of Arkham Asylum itself, the intensity of facing off against iconic villains like the Joker. It was like stepping straight into a graphic novel. If Rocksteady does remake it, they need to keep that feeling intact while adding those modern upgrades. What do you think? Would you be down for a remake of Arkham Asylum, or do you think the original still holds up just fine? So, not the best news for PS Plus this month. Apparently, November 2024's lineup didn't hit the mark with players, showing a 38% drop in active PS5 and PS4 players compared to October. That's a massive drop, especially since last month was a high point for the service, with games like WWE 2K24 leading the charge. November's offering just didn't seem to excite people as much. The games this month were Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 Turbocharged, Ghostwire Tokyo, and Death Note Killer Within. Out of the three, Hot Wheels was the most popular, but even that wasn't enough to save the lineup. It actually did decently, pulling in thousands of players who clearly still enjoy the series. But the other two games didn't fare so well. Ghostwire Tokyo, despite being a solid game, ended up as one of the worst performing PS Plus games of the entire year. A big reason? It was already available on PS Plus Extra earlier in the year, so people who wanted to play it probably already did. Plus, it's PS5 only, which automatically limits its reach. Then there's Death Note Killer Within, which is a live service game with a gameplay style a bit like Among Us. Plus. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to resonate with players either, despite the Death Note brand being pretty big. Maybe it's because live service games often struggle on PS Plus, or maybe it's because Among Us was already offered earlier this year. Either way, it's now sitting near the bottom of the performance chart. It's worth noting that November's lineup came right after a stacked October for big-name releases like Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, and Dragon Age, The Veilguard. So it's possible that a lot of players are just busy with other games right now. It's kind of a bummer to see PS Plus lose some momentum after such a strong few months. Hopefully December will bring something more exciting to get us back on track. What about you? Did you try any of November's PS Plus games, or are you skipping this month? Did you hear about the latest update for Alan Wake 2? Remedy just dropped a new patch that fixes a bunch of stuff, especially with the Lake House DLC, which launched recently as part of the game's one-year anniversary celebration. It's not as huge as the anniversary update from October, but there are still some cool changes worth mentioning. First off, this patch is aimed at fixing lingering issues in the Lake House. One of the most practical tweaks? They've added more resource boxes before the final boss fight. Finally! It was a bit of a struggle before, so this should make things more manageable. They also cleaned up some weird bugs, like missing paint textures for enemies, and a rare problem where players would get stuck in an elevator. Imagine being trapped mid-game. Not great for the immersion, right? Outside of the DLC, there are fixes for general gameplay too. For example, there was an issue where you couldn't shoot after partially reloading. Super annoying, but now fixed. Also, if you've got a PS5, you might have noticed the DualSense controller doing its own thing with adaptive triggers. That's sorted now, too. But here's the neatest new addition. You can now boost your flashlight while reloading, which cancels the reload. It's a small tweak, but in the middle of combat, it could make a big difference. Perfect for those moments when things get hectic. Despite all these updates and the game's critical acclaim, Remedy admitted in a recent financial report that Alan Wake 2 hasn't turned a profit yet. Kind of surprising, right? But there's still hope. That report only covered up to September, so it didn't account for the anniversary updates, PS5 Pro launch, or this DLC. Fingers crossed things turn around soon for them. Have you tried the Lake House DLC yet? If so, how are you finding the changes? Big news from Arrowhead Studios. After previously saying they weren't interested in crossovers, the Helldivers 2 devs have now revealed that they're planning to add some crossover content in future updates. But don't get too excited just yet. While they're open to the idea, they're being really selective about what fits the game's tone and style. In an interview with Korean outlet Invin, CEO Shams Georgiani confirmed that while they're thinking about crossovers, they want to make sure these additions enhance the Helldivers 2 experience, not dilute it. So, no random mashups here, only collaborations that make sense in the game's gritty, satirical sci-fi universe. Georgiani teased a few possibilities, mentioning some characters from Sony's own lineup of exclusives. Imagine rocking Kratos' axe from God of War, or wielding Aloy's bow from Horizon Forbidden West. And what about swinging around with Spider-Man's web shooters, or donning a full Ratchet and Clank armor set? These are the kinds of crossovers that could make sense without breaking the game's vibe.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Game From Scratch, and Unreal Engine 5.5 is finally here. Now, I say finally, and that's kind of just a thing to say, because truth of the matter is...
Does anyone feel like the worship of Unreal Engine 5 by gamers is getting dumber? Just overnight, millions of YouTubers and Twitch streamers are all reacting to the UE 5.5.5 update and acting jaw-droppingly amazed at how incredible it is. Make no mistake, UE 5 is a powerful engine with many tools, but the way Epic markets their engine and the clueless reactions it sparks has made the already problematic gaming market even worse. Unreal Engine 5 is powerful, but how many actual good games have people made with it? Well, obviously these aren't UE 5's fault for why these games flopped, but nowadays, large studios are advertising the hell out of their games being made with UE 5, hoping gamers will buy them just because, wow, UE 5 graphics look good. Some other UE 5 games I can recall include Black Myth Wukong, Stalker 3, and Phantom Blade Zero. These games have stunning trailers, but when they actually release, they're full of bugs, performance issues. It's even a scary topic to talk about because people view this engine like a godsend, but it doesn't reflect the actual game. All those demos use max setting graphics, but an actual game has to allocate resources for AI, UI, back-end systems, etc. The way UE5 advertises its graphics creates an unreal image in gamers' heads, which leads to distorted expectations. Many studios already have their in-house or modified engines that are better suited for their specific games. UE5 is great for asset flip RPGs, but it's not the best choice for every kind of game. UE5 also has limited resources and guides for development, so you really need to hire experts to make the most out of it. This makes UE5 practically impossible for indie or small studios with limited funds. The engine is very complex to develop with. It's designed for large-scale games, not small ones, especially pixel art games. Lastly, graphics may not matter that much. A game with good gameplay can still benefit from good graphics, but a game with only good graphics won't be good. UE5 has shown us how powerful its lighting and particle systems are, but these may not matter much if the game itself is bad. Additionally, these new systems are resource-heavy, so developers often cheat the graphics by using static lighting renderers and billboard particles to save resources. UE5 looks amazing, but no game will use these systems intensively at the current stage, maybe not even in the next 10 years. Some clueless people are starting to bash non-UE games for their graphics or making silly wishes like, imagine if XX game was in UE5, or XX game could be saved if it was remade in UE5. And the UE versus other engines debate is just a dumber version of the console wars. Everywhere in the software and hardware industry, we see constant failures in areas that weren't a problem before. Massively bloated studios with thousands of supposed professionals getting outdone by small studios or even solo developers. Heck, I've lost count of how many times a game is launched, running like crap, and then one day later, some guy mods a text file and suddenly the performance triples. But this is also the consumer's fault. No matter how bad a release is, you always have millions of idiots buying it, then running to Steam reviews to complain about how it doesn't work. But it doesn't matter because they've already given their money to the developers. This happens dozens of times every year, and no one ever learns. The engine is very powerful, no doubt, but good luck finding a second Carmack who can actually put it to good use. It's understandable to feel anxious about the shift to Unreal Engine 5, especially with all the hype surrounding it. The recent news about 343 Industries moving Halo to UE5 and The Witcher 4 being developed on UE5 has certainly stirred up some mixed feelings in the gaming community. Sony's in-house engines, Spider-Man 2, The Last of Us, Uncharted 4, Horizon Forbidden West, and God of War, Ragnarok were all made with proprietary tech, and they do indeed look and perform incredibly well. These games have set a high bar in terms of graphics and optimization, often running at a smooth frame rate and maintaining impressive visual fidelity. The fact that they've been built using custom engines, tailored specifically to their needs, shows how effective in-house solutions can be. Sony's games, especially from studios like Naughty Dog and Santa Monica Studio, seem to benefit from deep integration between the hardware and custom-built engines. These games are optimized not just for stunning visuals, but also for smooth, consistent gameplay.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.